Hello and welcome to Fatima Today, the podcast of the World Apostolate of Fatima, USA. We ask you to subscribe to this podcast. Recent restrictions placed on the traditional liturgies have caused an uproar amongst many in the more conservative religious movements. After more than 30 years of relaxed rules in the celebration of these liturgies, the Holy See has reinstated past restrictions on priests and has limited the authority of bishops in granting permissions within their respective dioceses. Parishes which have successfully mixed both the old and new liturgies now find themselves having to adjust to these new restrictions. The Canons Regular of St. John Cantius in Chicago is one such group adjusting to the new rules while keeping with their founding. My guest today is Fr Joshua Caswell, Superior of the Order and Pastor of St. John Cantius Parish. Welcome, Fr Joshua.
Thank you. It's really good to be here.
Well, glad you are here. I'm glad we're once again back here at the Blue Army Shrine. So it's been an interesting time. I mean, a little bit of disruption, obviously, and but I think you've done a good job of handling or maybe navigating these waters. What exactly has been changed as far as, of course, the little background at Canons of St. John Cantius? I think I know enough about it, having been part of it from the very beginning, of course. It was the restoration of the sacred is what's behind your founding as an order. And of course, the Tridentine Mass came to be. It wasn't really founded in the times of the Extraordinary Reform being allowed again. In the 80s, I remember when Father Philip started over there, and it was just a couple years after that the first indult came out. But initially, you started with the Missa Normativa, correct?
That's right.
Can you speak a little bit about that and how that morphed into becoming the liturgy?
Sure. So our founder, Father Frank Phillips, when he founded our community, he would originally do the ordinary form of the Mass, but in Latin.
Correct.
And so that wasn't the traditional Latin Mass as people know it, but he knew that the riches of the Church, providing these beautiful riches, was what people needed to encounter Christ.
Right.
And then he was asked by Cardinal Bernardin, actually, to offer the Tridentine Latin Mass. And that just took on a life of its own. And so when our order was founded on our founding documents, we offer both forms. So we offer the Mass of Paul VI, which is the Missal from 1970, as well as the Mass of 1962, the Missal of John the 23rd. Yes. And so most traditional communities, they'll offer one Mass, just the Tridentine Mass, or they'll offer the new Mass. But we're in a strange situation where we offer both. And as you know, being a parishioner for many years, St. John Cantius has offered both forms of the liturgy. And it's worked well. And the parish has grown and thrived. But obviously, we're in different times, and we have new restrictions which came down from Rome. And we're in one of the dioceses with the greatest restrictions locally. Yeah. But we've managed to have a good dialogue with our ordinary Cardinal Supich and really navigate these waters. But it's been an adventure.
Well, I mean, knowing many of the people that have come to St. John's, and it is a very diverse group of people. I mean, from the years I was there, even in the late 80s and all when it started. And so many people, especially when the Tridentine Mass was brought back, there were a lot of people that were reconciled from the Society of Pius X. Not all of them stayed.
That's true.
Okay, but a lot of them came, and they were happy to see that this was being allowed again. There were some critics, and we know that, and but I think overall it showed that what I always saw was that everything remained, both with the Missa Normativa, the Latin, the Novus Ordo Mass in Latin, which I want to say really was done with Monsignor Schuler up in Minneapolis.
That's right.
Didn't he begin that, if I'm not mistaken?
He did, absolutely.
He did. And that's where it...
Great St. Agnes Parish in Minneapolis. He'd bring in a choir and orchestra.
I remember that.
And most people... So I have a couple of illustrations, but one of that stands with me is one day we had a gentleman come to the 11 o'clock Mass, which is the Missa Normativa, or the current rites, but in Latin. And this gentleman came in, and he saw the Mass ad orientem with the Gregorian chant and the choir and everything, and he was so taken, he came back to the sacristy, and he announced to all of us, "I will never attend a Novus Ordo Mass again." I didn't have the heart to tell him, he just did. Because most people don't see it with the way Vatican II intended, with the splendor of the liturgy, with the Gregorian chant, with the beauty of the Mass. And so we've been able to offer both. So it has been a difficult walk for us over the past few months.
Yeah, I imagine.
And it has been difficult because we do love the Tridentine Mass, and we know people who made sacrifices to come into union with Rome to attend that Mass. And you're right, some of them never stayed, because we weren't traditional enough.
Right.
But others, of course, have.
Yeah.
And so it was a difficult thing, and I really had to enter into a lot of dialogue with Cardinal Supich, and I was very frank with him about the people who made sacrifices to enter into communion with Rome. And we don't want to lose these people. And he was understanding of that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So,
I know you did, and you put yourself in an interesting position by doing that. But it was important because you're being obedient. That's fine, but you're also, and hopefully this is a short-lived thing that this will be loosened up again, and there will be, a more generous application. And I believe that's how. Isn't that how Pope Benedict put it when he expanded the motu proprio?
He asked for a generous application, right? And the current Pope in charge, that may not be, and I can understand the way that some of these traditionalists are. Here's something very important that I see is the Latin Mass, the traditional Latin Mass, is a means to an end.
Yes.
But some people treat it like an end in itself.
Right.
So they make an idol out of the Latin Mass. And I can understand Pope Francis came from Argentina and their experience with certain groups of Catholics. Yeah. And it has been difficult for them.
Oh, sure.
But at the same time, St. John Cantius has a harmonious record of having both forms side by side.
That's right.
And what happens is people end up going to one or the other.
Oh,
it is the Mass, the Holy Sacrifice at Calvary, which is the true Mass.
Exactly.
So it's a means to an end, that encounter. But it's been a ride.
Well, I know when we're there and we do attend Mass at St. John's regularly, I mean, being an early riser, I'll go to the 7:30 Mass on Sunday because that is a Tridentine Low Mass. And it's, oh, you're a Latin Catholic. Well, I'm a Catholic, and I get up early, so I go to the Latin.
Right.
I mean, I love it. It's beautiful. Don't get me wrong, but I don't have a problem. We here at the Blue Army Shrine, as you know, we have we offer the Novus Ordo Mass 6 days a week, and on Thursdays we offer the Tridentine Mass, the Extraordinary Form. And I think it's beautiful. And our bishop here said, just continue what you're doing. He said there's no restriction put on it, which we appreciate. And it's put it more in the hands of the bishops. I think that might have been one of the motivations from Rome, was to put it back into the hands of the bishops, so that the priests themselves couldn't make the decisions. Although a lot of priests were restricted, maybe I think unfairly in some cases.
For sure, no, and I think, who was it? I think it was Bishop Tobin who said it was like Pope Francis used a chainsaw where only a scalpel was necessary. And that's a fair analogy.
That is.
But our founder, Father Phillips, did teach us to be obedient.
Oh, absolutely.
And merit comes from obedience. And sometimes that's very, very painful because we have this first Sunday exercise, also Christmas and Easter, we have to have the Mass of Paul VI.
Yes.
And it is the Mass, but there's something about the splendid nature of the Tridentine Mass and the silence that people really miss. But it's a sacrifice. But that is the true test of anything in the church, is there obedience or not? And that's been a decision that we've been placed in. No, we're going to remain obedient, and we're going to speak our voice and be honest with the bishop as much as possible, but we have to be obedient.
Well, at my age, I learned how to serve the Tridentine Mass as a young boy, okay? And it was majestic, there's no doubt about it. Now I find myself 10, 12, 11, 13 years old. Now the Mass changes, the late 60s. And I was a little confused like everybody, but life went on, and you're a teenager, it's the last thing you're thinking of, And so now, zip ahead some years, you go through the 70s. Now, mid-80s, I was traveling with some friends through France, and we were going by train. It was 1985, I'll never forget that. And we're going through there, and it's a Sunday, we have to find Mass somewhere, right? So we end up in a town in central France, and we got off, and I knew that they had the Society of Pius X had a monastery or had a lot of influence in that area. We'll make a long story short, we get out, we ask for a Mass, and the French are saying there's a big Mass over here, a big Mass. So we went to the big Mass at the big church there, and it was Archbishop Lefebvre.
Oh, wow.
Okay, Now this is prior to the schism of 1988.
Sure.
And I have to admit, it was a pontifical Mass. It was fantastic. I mean, wow, I hadn't seen this in years, And so there's a beauty to it, And sadly, 3 years later, of course, he consecrated those bishops and incurred excommunication. And it's pretty sad, and they're still going in their direction. Of course, the Fraternity of St. Peter was founded by people who left at that point, and Pope John Paul II, I guess, he founded them. That was great. But I guess my experience has mostly been Novus Ordo Mass through my life daily. I am a daily Mass attendee, so most days I attend. And I came to realize many years ago, I always did, I guess, But I remember during the consecration one time, you have these moments. Okay, and I did this podcast with Bishop Perry where we spoke about the Eucharist and the Eucharistic revival. And there is that belief, okay? And there was one time during a Mass, and I recall at the consecration, just, watching and thinking, and it's just, something just struck me in my heart, this is the essence of the Mass right here, whether it is done in the traditional form or done in Novus Ordo. It's the disposition of the priest and of the people, that's really what it comes down to.
Those moments where it feels like heaven breaks through, where the liturgy is so splendid, where there's a silence and you really have that experience.
Right, right. And there was a quiet Mass with only a couple people there that the priest was having. And I just recall how it just struck me that, this is still a Mass. We got to be careful. We can't be in love with the rubrics. That is a little problem with real traditional people,
I want to share an experience of my most beautiful Mass. It was actually at a bar, and I was stranded in a blizzard. And it was one of the most beautiful Masses I will ever remember. My brother, Father Nathan Caswell, and I were with about 300 youth for the March for Life. And it was this great blizzard. We're coming back for the March for Life, and there was no way we were going to move. We were stuck in Breezewood, Pennsylvania.
I recall this.
And there, we went for Mass without 3 days, and the children were so homesick. They just wanted to go home, and we couldn't even move. Yeah. But there was one heroic couple that drove through the snowstorm in a snowplow, and they brought, a moderately beautiful chalice and some things for the altar. Yeah. And my brother went to Sheet's convenience store and got linen-scented candles. That's all he could find. We got the hotel desk bell, and we rang this bell at the consecration. But I remember it was like 2 card tables stuck together,
ding, ding,
and one of the priests is hearing confessions under the Bud Light sign. But the locals in the town joined us. They joined us in the town.
Oh, great.
But I remember the children kneeling on the ground in this bar, sang Mass of the Angels like I've never heard them. Their homesickness was suddenly turned into a desire for heaven.
Sure.
And that was something I will never forget, because the offering that Mass said, it's about God's condescension to us.
Of course.
We give Him the very best we have. That day we give Him the very best we had. Whether it was the best sheets at the Econo Lodge, we gave Him that. But that's our religious community, people may be confused and say, oh, they sold out. Well, we didn't sell out. Yeah. Cardinal George told us that our charism is to make available to the people of God the heritage of the Church in all their forms and all their splendor.
There you go.
That means everything.
Yeah.
And so the liturgy is not ours. Liturgy belongs to the Church.
Yes.
So if the Church gives us the Latin Mass, we're going to offer that. If the Church gives us the Byzantine Mass, we're going to offer that. If the Church gives us the liturgy bit, we're going to offer everything we can. So that's why when you come to St. John Cantius, even now in these troubled times, you're still going to find a packed church.
Yes.
You're still going to find a full choir and orchestra. You're going to find the Gregorian chant as best as we can offer, giving the Lord the very best that we have.
Sure.
But that was a lesson I learned in Breezewood, Pennsylvania.
That's interesting. So. Yeah, it's very true, though. Yeah, I think that's just it. It's not where, it's what. It's what you're doing, and what you're bringing out. And I think that is the founding of the canons regular, or the Society of St. John Cantius, restoration of the sacred.
Right.
And that comes in many forms.
Exactly. Yeah. And so restoration of the sacred, it is, yes, it's about making churches beautiful.
Right.
It is about making the most beautiful chalices and all these things, but only because it's about restoring our heart, making our hearts pure, making them beautiful for God, because we're the real temple.
Yes.
Like, we spend thousands and thousands on churches and millions to make churches beautiful, but what about the inside of our souls? And that's really where restoration of the sacred is.
Yes.
And so our community of priests and brothers, now 30 of them, we live together, we live the common life, and we do things as brothers. We sing the divine office as best as we can, but it's about making our hearts beautiful so that we can have something to offer for the faithful. So.
Yeah, I tell everybody, when people say, even being here in New Jersey now, people, when they go to Chicago, where do you go? Go to St. John Cantius. Everybody, but it's interesting, no matter where I go, when it comes back to Chicago and I mention St. John's, oh yeah, it brings a bell with people all over the world, to be honest with you. And I think during COVID, the way you broadcast your Mass and everything really expanded
It was
a lot.
truly incredible. That forced us to offer, because we had to figure out how can we make sure people have access to the graces of the sacraments in this lockdown. Right. And it forced our brothers and priests who did this themselves. Yeah. They did all the camera work and all but it was tremendous. I think for midnight Mass, we had some 20,000 people viewing from all around the world.
Yeah, it's amazing.
We got letters and people from all over the world writing in how much it meant, because they got to peer into a bit of heaven.
Yes.
And I do realize that St. John Cantius is kind of it's a flagship of us. People are looking to it. It's setting a standard. But our founder's vision was that St. John can't just isn't where we come and we bring all these people into some enclave of traditionalists. It's not some enclave,
Right.
but it's a place where people go and they're changed and they come out and they change the world.
Yeah.
And I would say you're a perfect example of that. How many years were you a parishioner there? You're working, were you one of the first lay associates?
I was one of the first,
and now
very
you're the
first.
executive director of the World Apostle of Fatima. That's an incredible, that's an amazing, we're very
And
proud
that's
of
a
you.
foundational thing. You're right. And of course, Dorothy and I met there through the parish.
Yes.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's true. And it was a big part of our life. I mean, of course, I knew Father Phillips, and I remember going there in the very beginning in 1988 when he first got there, 87, 88, and walking in, this church was ready to fall down. It was a disaster area.
It was.
It was a neighborhood that had gone very bad. Of course, it gentrified then and came back.
Oh, gosh, there were boards over the windows. The neighbor, you could lie down on Chicago Avenue and not get hit. It was it was empty.
I remember slipping on an asbestos tile that was in there.
Oh, it was a wreck. And I mean, the church should have been closed down, and Father Frank was sent there really to ease the people out.
Yeah.
And he took the 40 people left and the one child, and said, you know what? The same expressways that brought people away can bring people back.
Right.
And so he just said, how do we do this? Well, let's do what the church has done for 2,000 years. Beauty. People don't want churches that look like Pizza Hut, as I've mentioned. They want a church that is truly beautiful.
Yeah.
They want an experience of heaven.
Well, they do.
And so our founder offered that.
Yeah.
And people came, and they're still coming, even in the current circumstances with the motu proprio and our dealings with Cardinal Supich, who's actually been very good to us. But even with all of this frustration, our vocations haven't stopped coming.
I know.
The men want to join because they want the life. They know that restoration of the sacred is not about the Latin Mass. The Latin Mass is not the end-all, be-all.
Right.
Jesus is the end-all, be-all.
And Latin Mass, not to it's extremely important, and I defend it to the end. But you're right. I mean, there's more to it than that. And there are a lot of people that go outside of the church and they'll offer the Latin Mass, a lot of praise. Well, are they really doing the right thing? Okay,
Right.
I mean, you have to understand it. There's obedience involved.
Yeah, I know. Something without, it was Pope Benedict who said that something that's not connected to the vine will wither and die. And you have to be connected to the vine of the church. And sometimes it's not convenient, but we're not Protestants,
Right.
There are days where I wish I was a Protestant again after being in the Catholic Church.
You're a great convert.
But then I converted from the Protestant church, but then I'm like, where does that end? Then I would be without the sacraments. We need the sacraments, and the sacraments come through the church.
Yes.
And those keys were given to Peter.
Right.
And that obedience, God says, I desire obedience and not sacrifice. He wants that obedience, and that's going to bear fruit. And it hasn't been easy. I mean, I love the traditional Latin Mass.
Sure.
There's
I do
nothing.
too.
I'm pretty. What am I? I'm pretty overactive in my mind.
Yeah.
But it's one of the few times in the day where I find rest, where I step into the missal, and it's just this quiet and peace I haven't experienced.
Sure.
It's the one place of rest.
Oh,
so,
it's absolutely beautiful.
I mean, it would be hard to lose that. But again, the liturgy doesn't belong to us; it belongs to the church.
Yeah, it does.
So.
It does. But I think we stay faithful to what we're doing, and I just believe this time will end. It'll come back, maybe in a different way. And there are people that came after the council. There was a big push for the change for the sake of change, people, and that was what the council called for. It really didn't. And I think that maybe some of them still feel that's important. But it really didn't prove to be fruitful. I mean, where in the church do you see the biggest growth? And it really is in a more traditional movement.
You do,
I mean,
absolutely.
look at St. John's.
Parish is really just, incredible growth in all.
Yeah.
I have to worry about where we're going to fit people on holy days.
I know.
And that's an incredible worry that most pastors don't have.
Yeah.
But it's because we're offering, people want to go to church and have heaven.
Absolutely.
So I heard that in South America, the two fastest growing religions are, paganism and Pentecostalism. Now the question is, why is that the case? Why are these the two fastest growing sects in South America? Because they deal with a threshold between heaven and earth.
Oh, okay.
And so Pentecostals, they really believe in the supernatural, they believe in grace.
Right.
Pagans, the superstitious Santeria, they believe in there's some power. They want power that's not on this earth. So when you walk into a church, you want something that it's the threshold to heaven and earth.
Yeah.
And I think that's what St. John's is able to provide.
Yeah.
And you look at the demographic. You've seen some of our high masses, the amount of young adults.
It's amazing.
And they're not just your typical Catholic young adults. You see the pierced ears and the blue hair
Oh,
and
yeah.
all that.
Oh, yeah.
It's
There's different kinds of people that walk in there. But it's interesting. I mean, having started going there in the 80s, and so many people come in with their young children who are now grown, and they're their children now, and they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children. You can see how it's really grown in those years. And it's I introduced Father Phillips at a conference one time, and I used the analogy of the Field of Dreams. They said, if you build it, they will come. And he built it, and they came. Mm-hmm. And it's very true, and it's, and it's beautiful and then of course, in other parishes, you have St. Peter's and Volo in the Archdiocese of Chicago. You're in Springfield, Illinois, with 3 parishes down there, right?
Exactly.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And that's wonderful. Yeah.
So, and we are expanding as fast as we can.
Yeah.
And we're looking to come to a diocese near.
We'll make
you
you an offer. We'll maybe get you out one of these days.
But our order, so diocesan priests, one of the more important things of our order is not just that we offer the Latin Mass like the fraternity, but that we live the common life.
Yeah.
And
important.
so our constitutions say that between 4 and 6 priests go out together.
Yeah, that's great.
Because when we go somewhere, we sing the divine office. We're living the common life like the apostles lived.
Right.
So we're not on our own. So it's kind of like the special forces in the church. Yeah. We want to bring not just one person, but a whole community. Mm-hmm. And that's part of our goal. So.
Well, I know when you have your 7 a.m. Mass daily, and then of course it's always with the community and their singing and all that. And so many people come in and they stay to hear everything, and they come back in the afternoon for prayer, which I think is nice. It really is. It's on even people, the lay people come in and want to be part of that.
Providing that oasis in the midst of the city of Chicago is a...
Yeah, I mean, it truly is. I mean, especially today with the cities, all these cities, Chicago not being, of course, being a Chicago, and I know those dynamics a little better than most, and it's difficult. They're difficult times in any urban area, but you're right. These are the oasis, and this is why you stay there. I know when people would say, "Well, you guys have that place in the city. Why do you guys?" And St. John's is one of the biggest reasons why, to be honest with you. And of course, we live very near. Our place was near Holy Name Cathedral, and it was always good to have the churches around you can get to. And that's
absolutely,
that's the urban experience that you don't have in the country necessarily. Mm-hmm. But we have this shrine here, which kind of makes up for it. It's good.
Well, it certainly does.
Yeah,
it's such a blessing to be here at this shrine.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I try to do every year, and I look forward to it because it's a place to recharge and refresh. And I believe there's something very special about the grounds here and the way that Our Lady works here.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you coming and being part of our Eucharistic Reparation Weekend, and of course, coming into the July apparition, which to me is the most important apparition of Fatima. I've always said that because people say, "Oh, the miracle of the sun." Yeah, that's important. All these, but it was in July when that terrible vision of hell was shown to the children, and they really understood their mission of reparation. And that's what sacred liturgy is all about. Mm-hmm. It's making reparation. I mean, you read in the Missal. That's what you're there for, to offer yourself to God. That's what the Mass is about. It's atonement.
Absolutely.
And we have to, and we really must take that position. And this apostolate, I think, of course, we're in our 75th anniversary now, and you have some great Fatima events going every day. You'll have on the 13th, you have your processions in the city. But I want to mention a couple of the things to our audience about what we've done in the past during the centennial year when we had the International Pilgrim Virgin there. And you pointed out very well, we took the beautiful image of Our Lady over and west on Chicago Avenue to Eckerd Park. We took this beautiful image to a broken part of the city.
Yes.
We had, how many thousand people do we have that night?
It was at least 4,000.
About 4,000 people. Even the secular press had to acknowledge those numbers.
Oh, it was incredible.
They had all
see
these
the
pictures
videos,
coming down.
The entire candlelit procession on Chicago Avenue.
And we had the police carrying, remember?
That's right.
And we went by the fire station. They all came out and turned the lights on at the fire station.
I'll never forget that story. So I remember that I had the fires. It was one of the city's busiest fire station. We're going right by it on Chicago Avenue.
Yeah.
And I remember when I saw the lights on, and I thought, oh no, we have to break
fire.
the procession for a fire.
Right.
So I was getting ready to get on the radio and call the marshals to break that procession.
Yeah.
Then when I looked closer, I realized the firemen were
all
out
standing
in front
at the curb.
with their axes, saluting as Our Lady went by. I remember having just goosebumps at that moment, but it's like the world knows they need God.
Oh yeah.
But taking this beautiful statue to the broken part of the city, and then when we had this Our Lady of the Broken statue from
another.
Kevin Matthews,
Right.
taking that broken statue
To the east.
to the Magnificent Mile,
Right,
to the most beautiful
absolutely.
part of the city. So it was a beautiful contrast. But I really believe the message of Fatima is not just for a select few; it's for everyone.
Oh, yeah.
And we believe it's for the city of Chicago.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this July 13th apparition. This is the day when the children were taught the "Oh My Jesus" prayer.
Right.
Like we need to
Save
pray.
us from the fires of hell.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Save,
right, yeah.
especially those who are in most need of God's mercy.
Yeah.
Like,
And here we are in
all
a
need-
city.
Right.
We all do, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the, of course, we're promoting very much the Night of Love, which is we're promoting the nocturnal vigils. And the Blue Army in Chicago, as well as many places in New York, and that for 50 years has been holding these vigils, you know, all-night vigils once a month at least. We had 3 in Chicago. COVID kind of tipped that down a little bit. But The Night of Love is a book our founder wrote on it. And the one thing that always strikes me in that it's devotional, what you do in those nights. One is the night litany for a big city. And if you read through that and the different things you're making reparate, you're praying for people who are out for sin. You're praying for people that will lose their lives tonight. You know, you're praying for police. You're praying for the firemen. You're praying for, you know, everybody. And it's really beautiful and complete. It's called A Night Litany for a Big City. That's always struck me.
Oh, I would love to see that.
Yeah, yeah. It's in
I-
our book. It's
yeah.
in our book, The Night of Love. And that was a book written by our founder, John Hafford, and we republished it just recently. But these are, you know, that's really what I really think that, you know, all these things, these things that were warned at Fatima, you know, nations could be annihilated. These things are real and could still happen. But I think maybe a lot of things didn't happen because of the devotion of people who did these kind of things.
Right.
In our 75 years in his apostolate, followed that pledge of Sister Lucia. And for those of you who haven't signed the pledge, it's go to our website, bluearmy.com, sign that pledge, and sign up to do the first Saturday's devotion. And of course, right now we still have our great Passport Promise going on, and I think you go to the website, you'll see it. But it is a beautiful devotion, and once enough people have, in my opinion, embraced the first Saturdays, you're going to see the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, or, you know.
I believe that's where it is.
Yeah.
I've never seen such crowds
Yeah.
at our first Saturday masses at St. John's. It's bigger than a Sunday mass, but those are definitely growing.
Yeah.
And I think the essence of all this is that prayer really changes things.
Yeah.
You can't get close to Fatima. It's not a sensational thing. You can't get close without realizing, no, prayer can actually affect things. It can change things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when enough people are praying and our hearts are converted, violence stops. Violence in the wound stops.
Exactly.
Drugs stop. We can change things.
We can change the world. We say we have our little bracelets. We go out. You can change the world,
I
and
love
you
that.
can change the world. We change the world by prayer. I mean, just look.
What was your billboard right on the Kennedy Expressway in Chicago?
Oh, yeah.
You had like 1 million cars drive by. What did it say?
It was said, "The world is in desperate need of help. We have the answer. BlueArmy.com."
Beautiful. That
And
was.
we had them all along. We had them in Los Angeles, New York, Miami, and of course in Chicago. And we also had the wall along St. Stanislaus Kostka Parish. And I don't know how many million people saw that every day. And God bless Father Boyce, she gave it to us to use. Then, of course, the diocese took it over for some of the things at the schools and that. But that was beautiful. I mean, the guy across with the big billboard, we were competing with him, and we were just hanging there, you know. But it was amazing. And yes, and we got a lot of hits on the website from that, and a lot of people came to see.
People need to hear that.
Just look at it. There it
so,
is.
you know,
Yeah.
Fatima right now may be unknown by some sectors of the church, or some people, but it won't be unknown for very long. It's going to be a center stage, because what's happening, as Benedict XVI said, the prophetic message of Fatima is far from over. We're not done yet.
No, you're right. And Pope John Paul II said, St. Pope John Paul II said that, you know, the Fatima message is more relevant today than it was in 1917. Now, he said that 30 years ago. And it's more relevant, in my opinion, even today, more so than even when he said that. Because it is the message of the day. It is about, you know, and I think the centennial showed that. During our centennial, people really came to understand that just because we have not fulfilled the Fatima message, just because her predictions have come true, the persecutions, you know, it's not over. We can still win the day, and we will win the day, you know. And the martyrs of the last century, and you know, you keep in mind that, you know, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the faith, and there have been more people martyred for the faith in the last 100 years than in all of Christianity combined, they say. I think we're on the threshold of an explosion of grace.
Praise God, I believe that too.
I really believe that's coming, and that we will, you know, that we will see that the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. And what will it be? Will it be a time of material prosperity? I think just the opposite, quite frankly. It's going to be a time of maybe struggle and or struggle, and maybe we have to fight for our faith more. But it will bring something so special. It'll reprioritize for us. And I'm hoping that this Eucharistic revival that we're in the midst of now with the USCCB will be a big part of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's time for us to recover the great treasures of grace we have.
Right. And I think and again, going back to the order and the founding, the restoration of the sacred. That's really what it comes down to. That's what drew me into it.
Restore what is broken. Mm-hmm.
Restore what is broken, exactly. And it's something we broke. Let's be
That's
realistic.
true.
We continue to break it every day. But but that's our fallen nature. Mm-hmm. Okay, we are, that's who we are. I mean, let's be realistic. It's not it's not justifying our mistakes, but it's showing the realization that we are part of a very broken people.
Mm-hmm. I had just a beautiful story came to mind now about repairing what is broken, what we have broken. Yeah. This was told by a saint. I don't remember who, but he was trying to illustrate what is the right response to realizing we are broken. There's two possible responses. One is to run in fear, and the other is to run to God in prayer. Mm-hmm. So he was telling a story about two young boys who are roughhousing in their father's house. And if you've ever roughhoused in your parents' house, and they broke this beautiful crystal lamp right by the table, they're jumping on the couch, the lamp falls to the ground, and it's broken and just crashed all over. And and you hear your father's footsteps come. You hear your father's footsteps coming up the driveway.
Ominous.
What's your reaction? Well, the saint said one boy went and hid under the bed, but the other boy ran to the door and ran into his father's arms and cried. And what's our response? Yeah. What are we going to do? Are we going to run and hide? Yeah. Are we going to pray?
Are we going to pray? Are we going to acknowledge our iniquity and go forward with it? And I think that's really what it is. And that's why I'm very hopeful for the future. Truly am. I mean, there's I know that it's a little difficult time, especially for the order and the things that you're adjusting with. But in a way, I think these things are somewhat temporary, and I believe that your mission of restoring the sacred, in your order as the canons of St. John Cantius, is the mission of the Church to restore.
Absolutely.
Restoration is what it's all about. That's what the Fatima message is all about. Reparation for sin. And
reconciliation.
Reconciliation. It's making reparation and Eucharistic reparation. Of course, that's such a big part of everything you're doing there. Your beautiful Fatima Shrine, I have to say, you rival us in some ways over there. But
we learn from the best.
You learn from the best. You've done a pretty good job of it. But it's great. It's great, and it's an honor to be part of it. It's an honor to be in this position with this organization, and it is an honor to still be attached to things back in Chicago and
well, you certainly have our prayers.
Yeah.
And you have our admiration. Thank you for the great work you are doing.
Well, we're trying. Well, myself, no, but the people that are around me. If I want to get a pat in the back, it's for bringing in the right people. Yeah. But thanks a lot for being here today and doing the show, for being here, being part of our liturgies and what we're doing, and we do appreciate it. So you'll be back, of course. We're gonna
absolutely
let you go. Okay.
Thank you, David.
You're very welcome. So thank you for joining us today on this podcast, and we ask you to subscribe to this. God bless you.